Hello and welcome to another edition of Truth is Making a Comeback, a production of LibertyNation.com. I'm Lisa K. Donner. On today's episode, it's all about trade this week as China and the U.S. go at it. We'll give you the pros and cons of it with economic correspondent Andrew Moran, facing off against managing editor Mark Angelides. Are children being used as human toll cards at the border? Our Joe Schaffer joins us for a shocking but not surprising story. Foster care hell, an exclusive interview with someone on the inside, has revealed a holy mess. Jeff Charles will explain. And everything you always wanted to know about the garbage man but were afraid to ask. All this and more coming up right now on Liberty Nation's TV News Magazine. Tensions and tariffs alike continue to rise as the trade war with China escalates. The U.S. has increased the duties on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports from 10 to 25%. China's reaction? Higher tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. goods ranging from 5 to 25%. President Trump seems optimistic, but many congressional Republicans feel the tariffs have got to go. Who will blink first in this economic game of chicken? When the dust settles, who will emerge the winner and at what cost? Joining me now are Liberty Nation's managing editor, Mark Angelides. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me on board, Lisa.
And Andrew Moran, LN's economic correspondent. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so tariffs against Chinese products obviously make them more expensive to the American consumer. We know that. But they also make American-made goods more appealing. Ultimately, Andrew, which do you think benefits the average American more? The boost in U.S. production and jobs, or just cheaper stuff?
There is a reason why you can't have both. The U.S. economy has a pretty vibrant manufacturing sector. Everyone thinks that because the Chinese are producing everything and the U.S. imports hundreds of billions of dollars every year, that the U.S. doesn't produce anything. But if you look at the numbers, the U.S. produces aerospace technology and exports a lot of professional business services. A lot of people have this idea that in order to be a manufacturing economy, that you have to produce T-shirts, you have to produce snow globes. This was actually a lot of libertarians that make fun of Bernie Sanders several years ago because he was upset that he went to the Washington gift shop and he saw that snow globes were made in China. There's nothing wrong with you relying on a foreign country to produce items like that. It's better than having a sweatshops that you did 60, 70 years ago.
Mark, there's a lot of concern about this trade war might hurt the American consumer, but what about China? You spent 10 years in China. A big part of the president's optimism comes from the trade imbalance. Far more Chinese goods come to the U.S. than the other way around. So who has more to lose here, Mark, U.S. or China?
It's a tough one, but in the long run, I think probably China. The reason being is when we talk about American manufacturing and products made in America, they're made in America. That's where they come from. But when we talk about products made in China, that's not the root place where many of the things come from. China's moving away from, it's moved away from agriculture, now it's moving away from manufacturing. And a lot of the Chinese companies, they outsource this stuff to other countries. Specifically at the moment, Vietnam's the big place for it, especially for fabrics and things. So what's happening is they're going to have to renegotiate all of their supply chain. And this is a major, major issue because there's got to be renegotiations for every price along down the line. And nobody seems to take that into account. Another key factor, we may notice, I'm sure we'll talk about this in a moment with the stock markets, but the Shanghai Stock Exchange, from what we can gather, this is being held up by the Chinese government at the moment. They're trying to rally the stock market in their favor. And this is only a short-term solution. So both sides will hurt for a while, but I think China's probably going to get the worst of it.
All right, Andrew, your thoughts on that?
Well, China, the Chinese company is plunging right now, but there has been some rebound lately because of monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus by the People's Bank of China. The U.S. economy, there's a lot of volatility in the U.S. stock market because the tariffs affect prices. When you have tariffs, it raises prices, and therefore it could affect sales, and therefore it could impact corporate earnings. So a lot of investors fear that the longer the trade war it lingers, then you're going to have the Dow Jones plunging 600 points because some retail company couldn't sell enough because they had to raise prices on pair of jeans or whatever is imported from China.
Okay, Andrew, if the trade war continues to escalate, how can we expect financial markets to react? And what should we expect for the American economy in general? Should we expect a net positive or a net negative? Or should it all balance out in the end? And Mark does make a good point. The Chinese are propping up what's going on in Shanghai, whereas in America, that's not happening.
Well, one of the reasons why President Donald Trump wants the Federal Reserve to slash interest rates is because he knows that the cheap money would be funneled into the stock market, and therefore it could somehow be able to manage any negative effects from the trade war. When it comes to China, there's only so much stimulus that they can have. Same with the Federal Reserve System. So the American economy, you're already seeing higher prices, and they're able to sustain itself because of the fiscal stimulus by President Trump. He cut taxes, he cut regulations, so he prepared himself for this trade war, and the U.S. is able to manage itself properly because of all the stimulus that the White House has put forward.
Mark?
I'm not entirely convinced that when you say that China has only limited amount to put into the actual economy. I'm quite familiar with the Chinese economic system, and what happens is that this money literally just gets printed out en masse, but then it gets loaned out specifically. A large percentage of it is earmarked for the big four, the four major Chinese banks, which are state-owned in part. And then they have an obligation to receive the money to loan these out to other state-owned enterprises, who are the people who, by and large, own many of these international export companies, manufacturing companies. So these are actually government industries that are being hurt by the tariffs, and the only way they can get out of it is by double dipping. So they're taking a hit on the production, but they're also taking a hit from the money that they're loaning out that's never going to be paid back. And this is a very dangerous thing for their economy, and they can keep pumping more money in, but it's just going to keep hurting them even more because it's hurting them twice.
If you look at actually a lot of the state-owned enterprises in China, they're actually crumbling. They're failing. The provincially owned firms that specialize, let's say, in iron, they're closing their doors. And also there's a huge corporate default happening in China. You already had hundreds of companies file for bankruptcy because of the huge default they're having on the junk bond market and in the public bond market. So Chinese companies are suffering too, and U.S. companies are going to suffer as well. I mean, taxpayers because a tariff is a tax, so you're having a lot of companies having to raise prices, and therefore you're having so let's say, for instance, you're saving 40,000 manufacturing jobs, but then there's going to be a huge offset in the loss of automobile jobs. Right now, for instance, there was 20,000 job losses in the auto sector last year. So you're having an imbalance on the labor market too. You're misdirecting resources. You're misallocating all the necessary money. So it costs $900,000 per manufacturing job. It costs $500,000 to save every job in general from the trade war. So both sides are suffering as well. And as I said, the corporate default rate in China is exacerbating, and the numbers in the U.S. are surging as well. The junk bond market in the U.S. is on the verge of popping also.
Let me just slip in here, Mark. You wrote about the concerns of the world economy. Some suggest that the tariffs will actually hurt the global economy. You're in the UK, so you understand a little bit about the global economy. That's apparently bad for globalism, but could it just be another part of the president's plan to make America great again?
Yeah, it's mostly you get this from politicians and finance spokesmen for the government who are saying that this is damaging to the global economy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing for individual countries. So for example, let's say America, if they're having issues with getting a proper balance with China, And this means that the manufacturers or the end product manufacturers within America might start diversifying where they're actually sourcing their things from. You see, as I mentioned earlier, China gets most of its base manufacturing from Vietnam because the running costs are low, the wages are low. There's no reason why America can't just go straight to Vietnam and start doing it this way. It's a good thing for America, but for the overall world economy, it's such an interconnected web that it makes investors very shaky. But American investors, if they're putting their money into American companies and American companies start to diversify where they're getting their things from, that's a good thing for America.
But where do you think China is putting the U.S. dollars? I mean, obviously, when the U.S. buys Chinese goods, what is China going to do with all those dollars? What they do with those dollars, that they reinvest that money into the U.S. economy. They buy American companies, they buy American goods. So there is why is the trade deficit so bad? Tell me, why is the trade deficit awful? I mean, everyone has a trade deficit. You have a trade deficit with your supermarket. You have a trade deficit with your dentist. You have a trade deficit with any company you do business with. Unless you're selling a product to them, you have a trade deficit. So I need to know why a trade deficit is so terrible.
It's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It depends on the individual players and what their priorities are at the time. So, for example, if you've got somebody who's trying to create more of a manufacturing base within their own country, then applying tariffs is going to be good because it's going to encourage the people within that country to invest in local manufacturing or trying to rejig their supply chain so they can make a better profit within the country. But of course, I mean, there's bad things and there's good things about a trade imbalance. It just depends on what your focus is. I think what Donald Trump's particular focus is jobs. So as you say, Andrew, it's cost like $900,000 to bring back an automobile manufacturing job. Is that right? 900,000?
Steel manufacturing job.
Steel manufacturing.
500,000 for jobs in general.
Okay. So it seems like a huge number, but that's a job in an industry that's going to carry on further and further. It's an investment in the future. It's an infrastructure investment because once that person retires, there's still going to be that job. Now, this will change, obviously, with technology, and the jobs will change. But these are investments for the future.
But you're already seeing automation impacting the steel manufacturing jobs. You're seeing just steel mill plants with hardly any human employees. So you're not really benefiting anybody. If you look at the latest numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think it was last month, the overall manufacturing net gain was 4,000. But if you compare that to professional financial services, I think it was 27,000. So the tariffs aren't making a drastic increase in the number of manufacturing jobs back in the United States.
Sure, but it's very much a trickle down, isn't it? So it comes in that maybe the jobs aren't in a particular steel factory, but then the steel becomes cheaper to the people who use it because people don't just have big blocks of steel just sitting around. They're used for things. They're used in construction. They're used in all sorts of stuff. And if the price is cheaper, doesn't that mean that this is part of the trickle down economy? More money can go for more workers within these different various fields. And then that trickles back into the economy because there's more workers, more people paying things into the economy by buying products.
But that's incorrect about steel prices coming down because when you block off foreign competition or foreign imports, that steel the steel producers they have they can raise the price as much as they want because they have less competition. So after Trump announced the steel tariffs on China, steel prices surged, steel prices skyrocketed. So I haven't seen the data to show that steel prices have come down.
All right, let me just say this, Andrew, let's move into the politics of this. Finally, we have an issue where Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump agree. So what's so bad about that?
Well, I'm pretty terrified when you have Chuck Schumer who said that the intelligence community can destroy President Trump 7 ways from Sunday, and then I'm scared when President Trump, continually lambasts the Democrats on a daily basis, rightfully so. That's terrifying. But bipartisanship isn't actually a good thing. When Republicans and Democrats come together, it's usually to hurt the American people or somehow take from their pockets or regulate their lives. So that's not really a good thing. And also when it comes to the Republican Party, they're pretty split on President Trump's trade war. If you look at Justin Amash, he he continually pokes fun at President Trump's calling himself a tariff man. He calls him a liberty man, and he points out all the data how the higher prices, how Americans are the one paying for the tariffs. Because for instance, President Trump recently said that China has paid through the nose all the tariffs, but China hasn't paid for anything. American importers are the ones who pay for the levies, and then of course that creates the chain where that keeps the prices get passed on to the consumer. So the Republican Party is split. Democrats, I'm not really sure where they stand on the issue, because all they ever do is attack Trump on every iota of what he does. So bipartisanship, I'm not really enthusiastic about it.
All right, Mark, I'm going to give you the last word, and this is, you spent a decade at least in China. From what you know about the Chinese, do you think they're going to blink?
The people on the street, not at all. The people who run the small to medium-sized enterprises, small to medium-sized businesses, it's not really going to make a major difference for them. I knew a lot of people in the textile industries, and their customers are American, but really many of these places, they're just middlemen. The production, the manufacturing happens in other countries, and they just send it through ports. That's really all it is, ports and lading. So most people are not going to blink. The government, yes, very much so. Number one, because it's a bit of a problem for their face, their outward appearance of somebody's involved in a confrontation with us, and they'll want to get that solved as soon as possible. So yeah, Chinese government, yes, it's a problem. People on the street, not so much.
All right, thank you both. Andrew Moran, hailing from Toronto, Canada, and Mark Angelides from the UK. Thanks so much for joining us today on Truth is Making a Comeback.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
Illegal immigration. Donald Trump, unlike most swamp critters, doesn't just see it as a talking point. The president has struggled since taking office to stem the flow of illegals pouring into the country. But Democrats and the leftist media have fought him every step of the way. They would have us believe the only crisis at the southern border is the one Trump made. Meanwhile, those who want the benefits of American life without the hassle of the legal route have devised a clever ploy for scamming their way into the country, and they're using children as their Get Into America free card. Joining me now today to discuss the horrifying practice of child recycling is Liberty Nation's national correspondent Joe Schaffer.
Hello, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
All right, so what is child recycling and why has it been so effective?
It's basically a toll card to get into our country. Our immigration policies have a loophole whereby if illegal aliens cross our border bringing a child with them, they know that in a few days the child is going to be released, and along with the child, usually the parents get released as well, and then they're basically dumped into our country and allowed to go their merry way. So based on this loophole, children have become a commodity. They can be used by anybody trying to sneak into our country. They can pretend that's their child, and it's their Get Into America card, basically.
Joe, is this a new phenomenon or has it been happening right under our noses all along?
It's been getting worse because of, in large part, because of the Democrats and the liberal media politicizing the issue of separating families, putting children in cages, all things that the Obama administration did as well. It was called just enforcing our border. But when Trump got elected, these players, anything they can use against President Trump, so they've demonized the one of the ways that we can secure our border. So what they have actually done is they've monetized children at the border. They've made the situation worse because children are now valuable. They're that card that gets you into America. So we're seeing more children coming in. A Republican congressional fact-finding mission was at the Arizona border last month, and they said that they were shocked that every single immigrant that had crossed the border and turned themselves in had a child with them, because again, they were counting on in a few days, the child gets released, the parents get released, and they go on their way into America. So this is a situation that's been made worse by attempts to demonize President Trump with enforcing the border.
So these children often don't belong with the adults they accompany. Is that what you're saying?
That was what was long suspected, and we've had that's been confirmed now. That's the big news now, that the U.S. Border Patrol found an instance, and it's been going on. But it's a confirmed instance of a child who had been recycled at least 2 or 3 times. So we know now for a fact that it's happening. It's been confirmed, and this is a way to game the system. There was an article today very similar about a major fraudulent marriage ring being broken up in the state of Texas. It was centered in Houston, but apparently it was all over Texas. So they use our marriage process, they use our child policy, anything they can use to get into the country. It really is asymmetrical warfare, and we have Democrats, we have liberal Republicans, we have the media not allowing us to defend our border, and we're just opening ourselves up to these kinds of abuses.
You know, I'm interested. Where did they dig up these kids? I mean, where did they find them? And I'm wondering, do they do it with the parent's knowledge, or are they paying off the parent?
We're talking about poor, desperate people here from war-torn countries and whatnot. I can't speak to the exact circumstances, but there's plenty of ways to, you just buy it. The smugglers have money. They do these. They're in this. It's a business, and they'll gladly pay relatives for a child, and they'll use that child to enhance their ability to make a profit. So we're boosting the smugglers here. We're boosting the process. We're making it. We're giving them more incentive to exploit these children these ways. And unfortunately, yes, I'm sure there are relatives who allow their children to be treated this way because these people need money.
So the leftist media loves to report on child separation at the border, and they often attribute it to Donald Trump. Now it seems like Border Patrol is taking children away from kidnappers and human traffickers. Not necessarily just their parents. So where are all the corrections and apologies? Why haven't we seen this widely reported as kids in cages?
Well, I think you already know the answer to that, Lisa. Progressives, leftists, they never apologize. They just move on. They can be wrong 99 times out of 100, and they not even necessarily right that one time, but they can use that to just hammer on. And if they're wrong, they can always just drop it and move on to something else. So there's no accountability. The media, why isn't the media held accountable for this? They are not intentionally not reporting the full scope of a story. And we have a major humanitarian crisis on our border. I think more and more people are starting to wake up to that. I even think the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates know that if they try to come across as open borders, that it's a losing proposition. It's a nightmare down in our southern border now, and good luck to them if they want to keep defending this, because they are going to be made to look worse and worse if this situation just continues to be exacerbated like this.
Well, this incessant virtue signaling by the media and the Democrats in large part continues, that the children are really Trump's fault and they're being separated from their parents, et cetera, et cetera. You tell a story in your article on Liberty Nation about a young boy who was asked about what happened to him, and he broke down in tears. Where is that on the CBS Evening News?
Yeah, you're not going to find it. Again, it's this cold, it's this callous. These people have an agenda, and they play up the individual human story when it serves their purposes, but they are more than happy to ignore the tears of a young child when it does not serve their political purposes. And we've seen this time and time again with other issues. So it really should call into account just how much do they care about these people that they cry their crocodile tears over. When the chips are down and when it affects their political ideology, they don't care about these children at all.
Well, I think this is an appalling practice, and I was so pleased that you wrote an article on this. Thank you so much for bringing this to light, and I hope more people and more media outlets will take up the mantle of these children and what's happening to them, because I really do think it's appalling.
Could not agree with you more. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Joe. That's Joe Schaffer joining us from the environs of Florida. I hope it's nice weather down there, Joe.
It's rainy as heck, but what can I do about it?
Yeah, same here in the swamp. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
There's no doubt about it. Children in America are a high at-risk group. The recent spate of school shootings are a classic example. Mostly perpetrated by young people, the violence reveals a serious mental health problem, not a gun problem. Just this week, we have news of the following. A missing Houston 4-year-old is presumed dead at the hands of her stepfather. A boy in Maryland called 911 to say that he was among 6 kids locked inside a hot car. In Detroit, a 9-year-old is accused of murdering his adoptive mother. Then there's what I call state-sanctioned child abuse, and that would be coming from the foster care system, where the government places children who need protection. But all too often, this protected care turns into an abusive nightmare. Joining me now is Jeff Charles, media and race relations correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
All right. So you caught up with Sharika Soul, who is an activist and survivor of foster care abuse. But before we get into that specific interview, let's look at some statistics. An independent study of foster care children has revealed in Oregon and Washington state, nearly 1/3 of children in foster care reported being abused by a foster parent or another adult in a foster home. In surveys going back decades, between 25 and 40% of former foster children report having been abused or neglected while in foster care. Does this jive with what Ms. Soul is saying?
Yes, it does. Ms. Soul was a victim of her foster parents, or her foster father specifically. And those statistics are pretty shocking. And there's other studies that find basically the same thing. A lot of people don't know that this happens. They understand that these children have probably been abused in the home, but they don't understand that when they get into the child welfare system, many of them are subject to even worse treatment.
So are the states not vetting these people?
I think what's happening is that at the state level, they're probably doing as much as they can. The problem is that the system gets overloaded. So that makes it harder for them to follow up when a child is placed with a foster care family or in a group home. They're not always able to follow up on the welfare of the child. So they basically have to just hope that these children are being treated well. They do vet these people, the foster families, before they enter into the foster care system, but a lot of people slip through the cracks.
Well, that's an understatement. I mean, these are really extraordinary figures, and it's almost like you're taking a child out of a neglectful and abusive situation, out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Yeah, it is. And again, that's not the intention, but that is the result. I mean, you listed the statistics. Johns Hopkins found that children in the foster care system are 4 times more likely to be sexually abused than children who do not enter the program. And the ones that enter into group homes, they're 28 times more likely to be abused than others.
So what I'm thinking is this like state-sponsored child abuse and neglect?
That is the fact. That is the fact of the matter. This isn't a case where every now and then a bad apple gets a child. This is happening, and it's rampant across the country.
Yeah, and I think the problem is it's not really being reported. I mean, it's just kind of sliding under the radar. I mean, everybody's making a big deal about the priests and the Catholics, and okay, agreed, that's a bad situation. But this also needs, I think, to see a little bit of daylight, don't you?
It needs to see a lot of daylight. I mean, even before I wrote my piece on it, I was shocked. I always knew that there were issues in the system because I would hear about it here and there, but you're not going to really see this on the mainstream media outlets. They usually cover the Catholic Church and other areas of child abuse. But this is a huge problem, probably every bit as bad as what's happening in the Catholic Church, but it's even worse because there's no exposure on it.
You also bring up in your article the whole situation with human trafficking and how it kind of spirals from bad to worse. So these kids are taken out of the home where they were apparently abused or neglected. Then they're put into a foster situation where they're definitely at least 25 to 40 or 60, what's that number? 40% abused sexually or otherwise. And then comes the human trafficking. How exactly does that work?
Yeah, that's a very horrible and tragic reality. In 2013, the FBI found that 60% of the child sex slaves that they freed had been in foster care or group homes. And the problem is that these children make attractive targets to traffickers because they're already emotionally traumatized. It's easier to manipulate them, and they've already been kind of primed for abuse. And so in these traffickers, these kids see somebody who can possibly save them from the life that they're living in their foster home, where they think that they're just basically a paycheck. But they find out when they get in with these people that they're going to be subject to even worse abuse.
This is really a sad situation. So what is Ms. Soul actually trying to do here?
Yeah, so she has a lot of different things that she's trying to do. She's working on a mini documentary to talk about her own experience as a foster child who was abused. She's also trying to launch a phone app that would allow kids who are being victimized to contact the authorities without their foster parents knowing, because a lot of these kids, they can't just dial 911 because they'll get caught. But if they have an app that maybe is disguised as something else, they have a better way to reach the authorities. And she also does a lot of activism and advocacy on behalf of children who are being victimized.
Now, I know you're the father of a couple of girls down there in Texas. Is there any sense that, so that you're particularly attuned to issues that deal with young ladies, but is there any sense that what the breakdown is between male and female in this whole situation?
Yeah, I don't have the stats on me, but as far as human trafficking goes, as far as minor children, most of them are little girls. And that is that is incredibly sad because that can ruin their lives up until adulthood. There are a lot of male children that fall victim to this, but they tend to prey on females because they can force them into pornography. They can force them into stripping. They can force them into prostitution much easier than they can with a male child. So, as a father of girls, I can't imagine going through something like that.
Yeah, this is a really bad situation, and it seems to me like a lot of these states are ignoring it.
Yeah, they are, and in some cases, they're even trying to massage the numbers so that people don't know exactly how widespread this is. There are a lot of states that are taking it more seriously. They're focusing more on working on programs to reunify these kids with their parents. Because in a lot of cases, just because Child Protective Services takes a kid from the family, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't work with the parents, give them the parenting skills that they need, so that eventually they can be reunited with their families. I mean, all welfare programs are supposed to be designed to get the person using it off of welfare. Child welfare should be no different. Now, some states are better at it than others, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Well, thank you very much. This is a very sad situation, and just the whole thing kind of breaks my heart. And I felt like the media isn't doing a lot to publicize it. So thanks so much for your article, Jeff, on LibertyNation.com. And thanks for joining us on Truth is Making a Comeback.
Thanks for having me.
And now for this week's parting shot. Let's talk trash for a moment, shall we? The reason for this not so savory subject is that it's getting ugly out there, and once again, President Trump is to blame. Those in the industry are calling the nationwide shortage of garbage men a perfect storm. The dearth of folks willing to pick up your refuse is causing a panic, and the real reason behind this unholy mess is the unemployment rate. By now, you may have heard that the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a drop in unemployment to 3.6%. This is being touted as the lowest rate in America since 1969. Yes, that 1969, the year we put a man on the moon and the New York Mets won the World Series, though there's still an argument in some quarters as to which of those two events represents a bona fide miracle. Along with that is the figure of 263,000. That's the number of new jobs added to the U.S. labor force in April. Much to the dismay of the Democrats, 76,000 of these opportunities were in business services, 33,000 in construction, and 27,000 in healthcare. Unfortunately, the federal government added another 12,500 new employees to its already bloated mass. Unable to ignore this economic boom any longer, media outlets like CNBC, The Washington Post, and dare we say CNN have begun to recognize what rank-and-file Americans already know. There's no one left in the country who wants to pick up your garbage. The Bureau of Labor Statistics verifies this and reports the unemployment rate in the waste industry is now at 2.4%. As you can well imagine, picking up your empty Amazon boxes, hollow soup cans, and heaven knows what else left curbside is considered, quote, amongst the least sexiest of professions. Put all this together and you have really bad news for the Democrats. First, it's a challenge to make the case that only the top 1% are benefiting from the Trumpian economic boom when so many people on Main Street are getting jobs. Then there's the issue of all these new folks joining the workforce who will be part of labor unions. From healthcare to the feds to manufacturing, these were always the Democrats' bread and butter. Take out union support, and what are the Dems left with? Well, there's always illegal immigrants and felons. Is steadfast Democratic support for these two groups now coming into sharper focus? CNN, yes, that CNN, has a poll out that shows 56% of Americans approve of the job President Trump has done with the economy. Here's the most frightening part of that survey for those on the left. Quote, Trump has improved his ratings on the economy by double digits among those under the age of 35. That's up 16 points. Non-whites up 13 percentage points. Independents up 11 points. Women up 10 points. And even Democrats up 10 points. These Democratic groups have been consistent Democratic voters for many decades. Look at it another way. Would Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, or even Jimmy Carter have made it into the Oval Office without blacks, Hispanics, women, or those under the age of 35? Perhaps this is why Democrats are making every effort to keep the current president off the ballot in 2020. But back to the urgent matter at hand, your trash. You can bet the folks that have changed Virginia from a red state to a blue one live in and around Fairfax County. So in addition to losing voters and having to admit to a smoking hot economy, they're being treated to a lovely tableau of blue and green trash cans sitting in front of their swank abodes all the livelong work week. While the president's supporters may throw up their hands and admit that, in Trump parlance, I'm tired of winning, Democrats are panicking that they may not see a W in their column for some time to come. But in the meantime, if the Dems in D.C. can't find anything else to do, they can be directed to the local waste management company. I hear there are a lot of openings for trash haulers. And that's my parting shot. And that's it for this edition of Truth is Making a Comeback. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and hit our website, libertynation.com, where facts matter. I'm Lisa K. Donner. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great week.
Truth is making a comeback. Visit us at libertynation.com.